So last week we had a wonderful session presented by Katarzyna Grabda about LinkedIn and all the tricks and everything. And after that, she decided to sacrifice me and throw me under the bus. So we are doing the webinar one now. This is a shorter version of what we did last year for the Inner Circle, which was a course about turning your content into a presentation. And this is an updated version, and I'm going to show you what I do, why I do it. I made a lot of mistakes. Some things are good, some things are probably not. So we can all learn from it. It is supposed to be interactive, and it's more about sharing ideas and experience. So it is going to be interactive. So designing a webinar that people want to attend. Yes, they do, but it doesn't mean that everybody understands it. And unfortunately, that is our responsibility. Clarity is our responsibility. And I'm going to show you why and what we can do about it. What I can promise is that every single time I did a webinar, I improved it. I don't think that I had two identical webinars because I was doing a webinar every single month, and I always had to update it based on what I learned, what I experienced. And at the end, we always had questions. So a live Q&A. And to be honest, that was the best part, because that's when you understand what people understood, what kind of questions they have, what they are interested in, and also what is the language that they use. Because there's no point in talking about something that people cannot understand. Or maybe they use the same words, but they mean something else. So to me, that was the best part. And sometimes the Q&A was even longer than the presentation itself. So a lot of people are scared of presenting. So public speech and webinars and all those things. And I remember when I started, I hated it. But once you have a framework for something, then you can break down a complex reality into more manageable components. So if you look at this pyramid, for example, when people start, then usually they focus on themselves. And this is when we are terrified. And public speaking is the number one fear. That is not exactly true. We are not scared of public speaking or webinars. We are scared of the judgment that we can have. What if I make a mistake? What if I sound stupid? What if they don't like what I have? Well, yes, it is real because we are hardwired for conformity. Rejection is horrible. Social rejection feels physical, like physical pain. It's not nice, of course. We are scared of that. But when you focus on yourself, then it's a lot of pressure and people can feel it because we are not going to perform. And everything changed when I heard that really good example that imagine that you are in the desert and somebody is crawling in front of you. They are dying of thirst. They can barely crawl, but you have a glass of water. You could give it to the person. But then you start thinking, yeah, but I haven't polished the glass. Maybe, what if it's warm? What if they don't like it? You know what? That person doesn't care about that. Just give them the water. That's what they care about because they need it. So if you know that you have a topic that matters and you are good at it, and it can be beneficial to someone, then the focus is not on yourself, but on your message. You know that probably there is somebody there in the crowd, in the audience, who needs to hear what you have if you share your experience. So the second level is when you're getting good at it, but it's just not clear. Some things work, some things don't, but you don't really know why. You get it right, but you make a mistake, but not sure what to change exactly to make it better. So once you have a structure, you create much more clarity, and then you have credibility, which is fantastic. That's a high level, but you need more than that. So engagement is important. Being smart is not enough, and I'm going to show you why. Competence on its own is not enough. And I made that mistake in the beginning. I thought I had to sound really professional, but then people just didn't understand what I was talking about. And if you really understand the topic, then you can make it sound simple. And that is real superpower. And at the same time, when you know that you have a message and you also have a solution, not just message, because often people use really important topics as marketing tools. And that turns into virtual signaling. That's not credible, that's cheating, that's not nice. But when you really practice what you preach, it becomes much more real. And that's how you can reach the highest level. You know that you are there to serve people. And that is really scary. because entertaining people is much easier than serving them. And this is something that we need to remember. Entertainment is easy. Service is not, because service requires you to say something that might be difficult to hear, to ask a question they might not like. But at the end of the day, that's exactly what they need. You do it because you have their best interest at heart. But you have to be fearless to do that. You have to face the challenge that what if they don't like me? Well, don't go for that. It's not about liking you, it's about respecting you. It's not the same thing. And that's a concept that we use in coaching as well. And that's why it's important. If you have a solution and you know that it helps people, then you're not selling anymore. You are helping because they can feel that conviction. And that's when you connect with people. And to be honest, I don't have a problem with this anymore because I know we have a proven track record. I know it makes a difference in people's lives. It's not selling, it's a no-brainer. And just to show you, this is where we started. So that was my, probably one of the first presentations, the webinar. So we had 1 or 2 participants. I didn't use the camera. Everything was written down and I was reading. And this is how the slides looked. Not pretty. You can see PowerPoint here and there, and I can see that Anna is disturbed because I know she likes pretty stuff. Well, this wasn't. But we needed this to get started. And every single time, I could improve it. So that was 10 years ago. And now we have a whole ecosystem around it. We have a selection of assessment. We can create blueprint. We can measure something that other people can just talk about, supported by our little friend Gloria. So that's the beauty of it, that you need this to get to this level. But a lot of people get stuck in the beginning because what if it's not perfect? It wasn't perfect, but it was useful. And I wanted to share that message. But even to this day, I'm not listening to my own podcast because I sound like a Donald Duck and I just don't like it. And it would be useful to do that. But still, I'm struggling with that because I don't really like my voice. So we see, it's a never-ending story. Oh, that's another slide I had. You can see that even that time I had the same, very similar style. So I'm much more sophisticated now. Still sharing the same opinion. So let's make it a bit more concrete. When it comes to designing a webinar, you have to think about what is it that you want to talk about and how do you structure it. So at the end of the day, whatever you do it for 2 reasons: to avoid pain and to move towards pleasure. Sounds very simple, sounds very objective. In reality, it's very, very subjective. But there is a system to it. So if you think about it, we have external and internal pain. And let's start with the external pain, which is a failure. So think about your clients. What kind of external failure they are experiencing? So maybe they work, what worked in the past doesn't work anymore. Maybe they have dysfunctional teams who don't deliver. It's hard to attract and engage talent. That's real, that's objective, that's a real external failure. But more importantly, what is the internal fear that it creates? What's going on in their head? They're scared of becoming obsolete, irrelevant. If they're not succeeding, then they're going to ruin their reputation. What if they cannot meet stakeholder expectations? What if they are seen as somebody who's just buying time or losing control? That's internal fear, that's internal pain. This is what's going on in their head. And this is just an example. But then we also need something positive. So what about the external wins, the external pleasure? That if you get it right, then the employees are proud of working for you. Then you have high-performing teams. You are seen as a visionary leader and you create belonging. Fantastic. But how do you process that? What do you want? What is that intrinsic motivation inside? That you want to make a difference and create a legacy. You want to feel less stressed and burnt out. You want to feel energized and proud, and you want more freedom to do or not to do something. So you can see that you have 4 different categories. They are interconnected because marketing is about the external pain and pleasure, but people buy when you can tap into the internal ones. And that's exactly how you design the webinar as well. You start with external failures, turning it into pain and fear. Then you talk about external wins, turning it into internal ones. What do you really want? So this is the audience psychology map. So this is something that you can think about. Who is your ideal client? What are the failures? What's going on in their head? What do they want instead? And that is going to be the structure of your webinar. Because if you really care about people, you hurt them. You make them cry a little bit. And maybe it sounds a bit harsh, but it's also true that most people don't do anything until it hurts enough. People don't change. It's not about the amount of information because we have that. But information doesn't lead to transformation. That is much more personal, practical, and emotional. Everybody knows smoking is not good, but you don't stop smoking until you get the bad news. You have lung cancer. Then you stop, probably, because the information is still there, but your motivation is on a different level. Have you done anything like this, thinking about your clients or your audience? Because this is idea for a keynote speech as well, to make it more practical. Has anyone done it? It's interesting exercise, no? Even if you do it to yourself.
Just unmute yourself, Anna.
I think my intuition, I'm so grateful that I joined, even if I don't have time, because this is exactly what I need for tomorrow. It's exactly this approach. So thank you, Tsaba. Thank you.
Is it called a divine intervention?
Yes, it is.
I thought so. That's the definition. It all happens for a reason. But at the same time, then you can use this for coaching as well. You can think about your clients. Indeed, it's about self-awareness as well. Because we don't think about these things. So I would suggest that you start this exercise with yourself. What are the challenges that you are facing? What are you scared of? What do you want to happen? And why? It can be liberating. So when you have a webinar or any kind of speech, what is the big idea? What's the core premise? One big idea that it's all about that. And usually it's in the title, but not always. So for example, when we do webinars, sometimes it's a bit confusing and that's my responsibility. It's my fault. Because technically we have 2 sides to the business. One is that we work with coaches, consultants, in-house HR, and the leaders. It's about certifying them. They have all the IP, the know-how, all the tools, so they can roll out everything. They can create a scalable and meaningful business. But on the other side, we also work with clients directly, companies, teams, organizational development, executive coaching, leadership development. So the message, yes, there is an overlap, but at the same time, they have different pain points. And sometimes that's the confusing part because I try to put them together. And that's not always a good idea because we cannot really separate that we have only HR people and coaches or only leaders. So somehow we try to cover both, and it's not always good. But in terms of coaches, the core premise is the big idea: get ahead of 99% of competition by measuring and optimizing the biomarkers of high performance in team and leadership development. This is what we can deliver. Because a lot of people talk about, a lot of coaches reflect on this and that, but how can you reflect on something that you're not aware of? How can you optimize something that you cannot measure? I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is nearly impossible. How do you prove your value? How do you prove that you can deliver real value? Just because people loved your program, it doesn't mean that it was valuable. Again, are we in the business of entertainment or service? And that's why I do the webinar, because most coaches and consultants entertain, or they provide information. So I'm not doubting the expertise. Don't get me wrong. I'm not discrediting anyone, because a lot of coaches are extremely smart people, but they're not necessarily good business people, because they find it difficult to prove their value. And when I say value, what I mean by that is that value from the client's perspective, because value is subjective. It's in the eyes of the other person. And that's exactly what we can do, because we can measure the biomarkers. This is where you start. This is where you are 6 months later. These are the biomarkers that are directly linked to growth, profit, and engagement. Not kumbaya, happiness, and all those things. No, business. We talk about the language of business. And when we talk to leaders, then they can turn invisible gut feelings into visible and actionable insights to future-proof their organization by creating a culture of growth where people feel valued and motivated. A lot of them are struggling with this. They do the engagement surveys every year, twice. Nothing happens. They invest a lot in well-being programs. Doesn't change anything. Or the situation is getting worse. They're using a lot of fancy tools, but what if they optimize something that shouldn't exist anymore? What if they solve a problem that is not the real issue? And we have plenty of case studies where they do exactly just that. And that's the reason why I do this webinar. It's about building awareness. The problem is not when people don't know about something. That's not helping. But the worst thing is when they think that they have the solution, when they think that they know something that is not true anymore. That is the real problem. So the goal is to create more awareness, because the solution is only valuable if the problem is crystal clear to the client. If that is not clear, and it's not clear to them how you can address that, then your solution is not valuable. It doesn't matter what. And you cannot even argue with that. So that's the big idea. When you do a webinar, what is your big idea? What's your big promise? Has anyone done it? The regular webinar or signature program or keynote? What was the question? So, so when you do a webinar, a regular webinar or a keynote speech, what is the main message if you have to just summarize it in one sentence?
I don't want to take the stage again, but I will. But it depends, of course, on the topic. So it's not always the same topic. It depends on the audience. It depends on the topic of the conference or yeah. So it's never the same topic.
So give us a few examples if it's possible.
So like tomorrow, for example, I will talk about the transcultural competence of organizations and how to measure it.
So that is the topic, but what is the big idea? What is the promise? What do they get out of it?
To understand why we make this shift from intercultural to transcultural when we were focused on the differences mostly and understanding how people think and behave. And now we focus more on searching for commonalities. So go beyond the differences. Yeah, just, and for the first of all, also the idea is that we do not assess the individual competence, what we did in the past, but we assess the competence of the organization. So this will be the difference from individual to organizational and from intercultural to transcultural.
Mm-hmm. That's more practical. And you see, this is the interesting part, that often the coaches talk about topics, but it's not immediately clear to the audience why it's useful to them. And this is something that we need to learn. And every single time I do the webinar, I change it a little bit. There's always a better way of doing it. Clarity is our responsibility. We cannot blame anyone. But I used to have a lot of unholy thoughts because people didn't get it. But I thought maybe it's my fault. And it turned out it was. So let's talk about something important, the signature story, the hero's journey. What is that exactly? So it has to be clear that people don't want to guess. If people need to guess what you do, you lost them. That's it. They're not going to talk to you. It's not their responsibility. They don't have time. They don't have patience. If the packaging is not right, they're not going to open the box. It's that simple. And that's why marketing is so important, and the clarity. Because sometimes they do that, and sometimes that's the USP. So for example, this was a potato company. So that was on Shark Tank, that you can send a potato with a stupid message to someone, and they got investment. But they could pitch it, they could explain it. But that was really interesting. But the point is that thinking is extremely hard. It is energy consuming. And that's why when we are angry, tired, or stressed, then the neocortex switches off and we don't think. And we are really primal. So the question is, how can you make it as easy for the clients to understand what you do as possible? So they don't have to understand it. They don't have to think. Do you speak their language? Can you describe their problems, the symptoms they're experiencing in a language that they use? If you can, and they can feel that you've been there where they are now and you got out of it, then they listen to you. Expertise is important, but experience is vital as well. When you combine both, you are the authority. You are the trusted advisor. But here's the problem, that often we want to be the heroes and we think that it's me. That's not exactly true. So that's why the signature story, the story brand framework is extremely interesting. And I'm going to walk you through all the steps, what it means exactly, and then I show you how we use it. The hero's journey. So this is something that they created a long time ago. And this is the same framework when you watch a good movie, usually. It's pretty much the same thing. So let's look into it. Before we do that, 3 questions. What does the hero want? That has to be clear. And again, I'm not the hero and you're not the hero either in this context. Who or what is opposing the hero? So we need an enemy. Usually that is very much needed. I don't know if you read that book. The title is How to Build a Cult, How to Create a Cult or something like that. So a guy in Brighton wrote it. And he explains it, but in a business context. And the point is that it has to be crystal clear what you stand for. So that's your integrity. These are your values. This is your mission. But also equally important, what are you against? If that is not clear, then identity is not that clear. It's not defined enough. And that's why we have to find that kind of who is the enemy? How is it trying to hold us back? And what does the hero's life look like if she does or doesn't get what she wants? So what are the stakes? Feeling better is great, but what if I cannot do something? So when you talk to someone, it has to be clear, what is the benefit in listening to you? And what is the cost of not listening to you? Again, everything goes back to pain and pleasure principle. We just have to understand that it's subjective, because maybe you love doing something that the other person cannot stand. So we have to understand them. That's why that psychology map is so important, to understand your clients. What is the pain for them, not for you? And once that is clear, do you think that you could pass the same test on your website? Do you think it's clear to the clients immediately what you do, how you can make their life better, and why they should work with you? Because if it's not, that's a problem. A lot of websites start with, this is my why. I had $7 when I got to the US. I was really poor. Who cares? Nobody cares about that. I know that Simon Sinek made it very famous, that start with your why. Yes, understand the neuroscience behind it. But first, people need to understand, can you help them? And if you can, yes, they're interested in your why. But let's not run around with it, because nobody cares about that. at least not in the beginning. They want to be the heroes. Your role or my role is not to be the hero. It's to be the guide. And that's a big difference. And I think, especially since the pandemic, our field, the coaching field, got really diluted because lots of people wanted to make money and they became coaches, at least on paper, for the wrong reason. They want to be heroes. Coaching is not about that. Consulting is not about that. It's about being the guide. So when it comes to the framework, first you have a character. Do you know them? What is it that they want? That's why we had that psychology map. What are they looking for? What's their story, experience? How do we interpret it? What is their life like? Do we know? Do we know what they are going through? And I can't remember who said it, but if you think about your niche, then usually that is you 10 years ago. That's your ideal client. You 10 years ago. What kind of challenges were you facing? What kind of help would you have needed to speed up that process? Because maybe it took you 10 years to get to this point, but with the right person, it could have been 2. And the clients pay for that 8 years that you speed up. Because they can learn from your mistakes and your success. But first you have to understand that this is what they are going through. You've been there, you got out, and you show them how to get out. That's where the value is. But first you have to be able to describe everything using their own words. And this is another mistake that a lot of coaches make, that they talk about the root cause of a problem rather than the symptoms. Most of your clients don't know the root cause. So if you talk about the root cause, you're not going to connect with them. You can talk about self-awareness and all those things, but usually the problem is that other people are so stupid. Hold on a second. Anyway, that's their experience. That's what they know. That's what they notice. So if you talk about self-awareness, they're not going to read anything. You talk about why other people are stupid. Do you want to know? Ooh, hold on. This looks familiar. I've got that problem. And then you can educate them. You have to meet at their level. That's really important. And then you can take them deeper. So if you think about, this is exactly what the big brands do as well. So for example, Walmart, save money, live better. What are the primal desires? Money, saving time, gaining status, resources. And right now, especially if you look at the new generation, we need meaning for everything. And sometimes they choose the wrong ones, but the desire for meaning is important. So think about your clients. What do they want? What's missing? What are the primal desires? A character with a problem. So now we are getting a bit more concrete. Who is the enemy? What are they fighting, or who are they fighting? What's holding them back? Good people don't always win, at least not automatically. And what's the experience like internally? So we talk about fears, wants. What do they feel inside? What's the experience externally? So now we talk about failures and wins. That's why we had that map. Is that clear? When you create a webinar, when you think about your audience, we all need a villain. It doesn't have to be a person, so we don't have to make it a person. But you can create an avatar, for example. So during our webinar, we created a dark triad of future risking solutions. Because once you have a label to something, it's much easier to notice it. If you don't, it's very difficult. So that's why creating an avatar can be really useful. Does it make sense so far? So with a character, with a problem, who meets a guide who understands their fear, and this is you. This should be us, the guide, not the hero. A lot of people talk about empathy, but I think not many people have it. And I think you cannot really have real empathy to someone unless you experience the same thing. For example, I never understood why people said that, oh, I'm so lonely. I said, what? You have the whole house. What are you talking about? But then 3 years ago, when I was at home alone for months because my granny was sick, then I experienced loneliness. And you know what? I understood it. I was so grateful when somebody was ringing the bell, even if it was the postman. I said, that's fantastic. Somebody popped in without a notice. I said, hallelujah, great. And I never liked it before because I never experienced real loneliness. On an intellectual level, I understood it, but that wasn't empathy. At best, it was sympathy. And that's why it's really important. Do you have that experience? And often your niche is the biggest challenge you manage to overcome. That gives you real empathy. That gives you the experience and expertise. So if you combine that pain with the solution that you found, that's insanely powerful. And nobody can be better at your niche than you because it's yours. It's that personal. And sometimes this is what people are scared of. What if it's just too narrow? What if it's too tiny? Well, if a knife is sharp, then it cuts better. So you can dilute your message, but then you're not talking to anyone. It's much better to create a niche and then you can expand. If you dilute the message, it gets lost because that gives you the authority, your lived experience. Nobody cares about your books. First, they want to understand what you went through and how you got out of it. So don't be the hero. Be the guide. The customers are the heroes. And if you read books, you watch webinars, you watch speeches, this is what they get wrong most of the time. They want to be the heroes. They come with the big stories. Oh, I was nothing. Yeah, great. Sounds good. But it's all about you. Having said that, it is also important that before you offer a solution, people want to believe that something is true. So we have to lead by example. That is also true. So I'm not discounting that for a second. But that gives you the empathy and the authority at the same time. Amy Cuddy, social psychologist, explained that when you meet people, you pay attention to two things. Can I trust them? Can I respect them? And if one is missing, the message gets lost. Sometimes they phrase it differently, and it's about competency and likability. And now you can see a lot of smart people are competent, but not likable. Or you can be very likable and no competency, no substance. And unfortunately, that is still better sometimes, at least for a while, because packaging sells, but the content makes it sustainable. So we need both. And for long, this is what I didn't understand. I thought I have to be really competent and smart and everything has to be spot on. But you know what? Nobody can like a robot. Nobody can trust perfection because it doesn't exist. So if somebody pretends to be perfect, you know they are lying. You know that they are hiding something. So therefore, I cannot trust them. So at the end of the day, imperfection makes you more likable and human. It doesn't mean that we don't have standards. So once we meet a guide who understands the fear, then the guide also has a plan. That's really important. Stories on their own are not enough. We need a plan. This is where the process is important. Do you have a proven methodology? So you see, that's how you combine experience with expertise. You need both. Do you have a plan? Is it proven? Is there social proof? Is there a proven track record? Can you get results? How do you prove that? We need this one as well. And then, what should we do? Having a plan, not doing anything with it, is good for nothing. And I don't know if you read The Uncommon Sense in Unusual Times, but there's a really important part in it about the intellectual hamster. And that means that if you see a hamster, how they eat, they put everything in the face, the cheeks look like this, but they don't chew. Everything stays there. And a lot of people are like that. They read a lot of books, they have a lot of plans, they have lots of information, zero transformation, because they don't apply anything. As soon as you have to practice something, as soon as you have to implement a new plan, it is guaranteed that it's going to be uncomfortable and very likely it's going to be painful, and you also make mistakes. So it's better if you don't do it yet, but after the next book, after the next course. That's not how it works. That's how you create the intellectual hamsters. So there are two different options, direct and transitional. Talk to them. You have to be assertive. It's really important. But also, you have to educate them. You cannot force anyone. And sometimes I think this is where we also make a mistake, that personally, I really believe in attracting the right people. I don't want to chase anyone. But where is that point where generosity becomes somebody who's gullible? And you know what, let's just do it. No, sometimes you have to set the boundaries. And the boundaries are there to protect people and relationships. They're not punishments. So we need also filters. Who is serious and who is not? If you read Adam Grant's book about the givers and takers, he says the most and least successful people are the givers. If you give too much and there's nothing coming back, then you're a loser. But personally, that's one of the main principles we have, is outmatching. I truly believe in that. You can only get more, never less. But if somebody's a taker, not good, they're out. So at the end of the day, you need a plan and a guide to help you succeed. But sometimes success is about avoiding failure. Again, everything goes back to pain and pleasure principle. What does success look like? How does it feel? What happens? Yes, make them cry, but what I mean by that is that they have to understand the stakes are high. This is what happens if you do this. This is what happens if you don't. The human brain is not designed for long-term thinking. It's just not. It's something we need to practice. We have to be reminded of. We need a clear vision. We need high stakes because we don't do anything until it hurts enough, until it matters enough. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. So what is it that you can gain? And what is it that you can lose? And it's very clear. If you have good enough reasons, you're going to do it. If you don't, you don't. And that's why it's important. It has to lead to transformation. And I know that maybe this is not my favorite word, because I said it many times, that a lot of coaches talk about transformation, which kind of implies that you're not good enough. It's going to be painful. It's not nice. But at the end of the day, this is what we need. But to me, it's more about transitioning, that you know exactly where you are and where you want to get to. And that's internal. It's intentional. That's transitioning. That's leveling up. And when you talk about leveling up, it means a level of continuity. It doesn't mean that you're not good enough. It just means that there's always another level. We can get even better. That's the point. But we also need to understand that there's a different way of thinking about ourselves and how we want other people to see us. And there was a really interesting research. So that was done by Dove a few years ago. You can see two sketches each. One is how somebody described themselves and how other people describe them. And as you can see, most of them describe themselves in a less beautiful way than other people did. And that says a lot about our inner narrative, which is really interesting. It's not objective. But ultimately, we want other people to see us beautifully. But how do you do that if you cannot accept yourself? So a lot of struggles are internal, but they manifest externally. And once we understand how they think, what they're going through, it's easier to connect with them. So there's a signature story framework. And this can be about your company, why you started something, or it can be just an educational message. It depends. But the point is that there is a framework. There are certain steps and they work. And here's an example. 2 years ago in the summer, I got back to Hungary to refurbish the family home. So we have the situation. The painting was done, but the floors were a mess. 40 years old carpets with rough concrete underneath. It was pretty wild. Not nice at all. So I wanted to make it pretty, easy to clean, durable, you know. So I decided to do it by myself. I used 100 kilo of concrete in 2 rooms, and I installed laminated floor in one of them. I was proud. I watched some YouTube videos. It seemed easy enough. I mean, come on, you see how it's done, no brainer. Anybody can do it. There was desire and decision. Until the neighbor came over, who used to be a carpenter. I got some feedback. He said, we have to redo it. It's bad. Horrible, horrible. I almost cried. But he was right. Super glue shouldn't be used for laminated flooring, which I use in a few places. We did it properly in less than a day, and it looks great now. He was right. He cared more. So nice story, but what's the point? That I realized that I can do a lot of things, but asking for expert help can save a lot of time, money, and hassle. That's exactly what we provide leaders who want to build high-performing teams. They put the work into it, but they are not getting the results because they don't know how to do it. A lot of things seem to be common sense, easy to implement, but if they were, then engagement wouldn't plummet as rapidly as burnout is skyrocketing. So you use a concrete example, a storyline, but you connect it to your message. And sometimes that's like a slippery slope because people use big stories, but no real message behind it. So again, entertainment versus service. How do you bring it back to your topic? How do you make it more relatable? And this is one of those stories. Because how many times you see that on LinkedIn that, you know, the cheat sheet for psychological safety, do these things and not sit down. That's not true. Yes, it's interesting, it's ideal, but if that was true, you wouldn't have toxic companies. No, it doesn't work. Companies spend insane amount of money on well-being programs, and do they get the results? No, they're not, because it looks easy, but if you don't know what to do exactly, you're not going to get the results an expert could get you. So with this, you can be assertive without being offensive. You're not telling them they do the wrong thing, but you make them think. Am I doing the same thing in our company? So far it makes sense? Promise. Okay, so let's look at the practical examples. And here I use some of the screenshots from the actual webinar. So the opening part. Connect and context. So usually this is what Kasia is doing because she's the, you know, the soul of the company. She's nice and likable and all those things. So usually she does this. Where are you calling from? And talking about those things. But then I take it, you know, to the next level, more serious. So asking some questions, that's the whole point. Icebreakers. What is the most important and urgent aspect HR and L&D leaders are looking for in programs? So this is interactive. And then people say a lot of things, show them the result, scalability. Then we also talk about how would you ruin your company? And then again, people get creative. They remember what's happening in their life. Or what is the lead indicator and precursor of quality decision making responsible for 95% of business performance? You hear a lot of things. At the end of the day, it's psychological safety. 95% of business performance, psychological safety. And then you ask them, what's the level of psychological safety in your team, in your company? So far, nobody could answer the question. Would it make sense to know that as a leader? If you were a coach or consultant, would it be valuable to know that and you could give it to your clients? Possibly. So you already make them think. Connect and context. And then I also have to manage expectations, and usually I tell people that it's going to be intense and fast-paced and, you know, very dynamic, but I'm going to share the summary at the end if somebody needs them. Because yes, they could take notes, and that's also useful, but I want them to pay attention. Usually it is interactive. At least that's the intention. So managing expectations is important. And then third step, unique advantage and promise. So why are you different? What's your USP? Why does it make sense to listen to you? Is it going to be just theory, to share the insights from the books that you read, or it's based on real life experience and results? So some of those examples. How can HR and L&D be seen as a strategic partner? How can leaders get their organization future ready? How can coaches, consultants, and trainers prove the value of the services? These are relevant questions pretty much to everyone who attends the webinar. So they think about that. So are we going to get an answer to these questions? And technically, yes. Then you also need the shiny stuff. Because what's the point in listening to you? So you have to show them, yes, you have background, we've done a lot of things, and we work hundreds of companies globally. Now it makes sense. The topic is relevant, and they also know what they are talking about. We have the context. It is personal, practical, and promotional. Contrasting. So we did that psychology map as well. So kind of we understand what's happening, and that's why the Q&A is so important. So we talk about that. So how is it possible that they are spending insane amount of money on programs, but engagement is plummeting, burnout is skyrocketing, and it's getting more difficult to find people? Is that a problem? It's not that the results are not changing, but it's getting worse. And it's not me saying it, but up-to-date research. And probably it's happening in their company. But maybe they don't zoom out and they don't notice it because people get used to everything. So it's not a problem, but that's why we talk about the dark triad of future risking solutions, because now there's a label. So maybe they think that they have the right solution, but after this part, maybe they realize that, oh, wait, we don't. And that is the biggest challenge. If they think that they have the solution, then nothing goes in. So how can you build that awareness? How can you bring them from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence? If you cannot do that in the very beginning, if you do a training or keynote or webinar, then they are not going to pay attention. So this is what I mean by making them cry. They have to know that they have a problem. It's urgent and it's important. And then you also introduce the signature story. And for example, here I talk about my own experience. Again, the message is when I charged the wrong battery. I put a lot of effort into it. I was really proud, and I didn't know that we had 2 batteries in the car. And I was charging the one that I cannot charge. So lots of effort, no result. I did the wrong thing. And then we get into the core premise. So what do we have to measure that matters? That's the real question. So now we built awareness about the problems, the wrong solutions. So now the question, what is it that we should measure that matters? And that's how we go to the main content of the presentation. So this is how we introduce the big idea, the framework. So how can we ease the pain and add some joy? So we introduce the 3 invisible forces that make or break a team. A lot of people talk about this, or maybe they feel the symptoms, but they don't know how to measure them. They don't know how to optimize them. So, you can put a plaster on a broken bone. It's not going to help a lot. And that's exactly the point. That often people react to something that they can see. And often the most visible problems are not the real problems. They are the symptoms of the real problems. And then we can talk about the details. So this is what we do. That's how we use it. That's why it's important. So very simple question. Where is your team? How do you know? And I can tell you that nobody can answer this question. But would it make sense for you as a leader to know where your team is? Could you make a more informed decision? Probably. It would make a lot of sense. Because in terms of sales and everything else, you have the data. In terms of your people, not really. So how can you make an informed decision? Based on guess, hope? What if you use the wrong solutions? So we can dig deeper. What are the consequences of not learning and applying this idea? And what are the benefits? So see, pain and pleasure principle coming back. Well, if you cannot measure what matters, then you might optimize something that shouldn't exist anymore, or solve a problem that is not a real issue. Then you might struggle with proving the value of your work and the ROI of the program. Or you might endanger the future of the company by trying to save it. Now it's even more relevant, more personal. We can also use stories and statistics. And this is where I use this slide. So this is where we have data. So I explain how the averages can lie. But if you look at the individuals, this is a very polarized thing. I talk about a case study where one of the refineries burned down during our program, where the whole leadership team was in the apathy zone. And there's another one where they won the most prestigious awards in health and safety. They turned psychological safety into physical safety. So you have the statistics, real life stories, and everything else. So that's the logic behind it. And then we have to talk about the mistakes as well. Again, what if they think they have the solution? What would be the impact? That's the question. So this is where we talk about the cost of investing in the wrong type of experts. So we know that employee engagement is important. We know that leaders contribute to 70% of the engagement. So we know that companies spend a lot on leadership programs, but how is it possible that it's just dropping constantly? Clearly, it's not working. So you can spend on the leaders, but it's only good for the providers because they always have something to sell. So at the same time, we don't want to be negative or anything like that. So that there's a two-pronged approach. We always want to fix the bucket and bottle the magic. We need both. But how can you make it more tangible and visible? Because often they do a lot of good things, but they don't know what that is exactly. So they don't know how to pass it on. They don't know how to roll it out. And also, a lot of potential is lost, but they don't know where the bucket is leaking from. So what do? They try to top it up with employee engagement, well-being programs, spend more money. Would it make more sense to fix the holes? Possibly. And also, sometimes we think that we have really big ideas. So this is the story that I use sometimes. Do you recognize this picture? Do you remember the story behind this? Anyone? Do you remember this? It was very popular on LinkedIn. Who can remember what that was? What was the story?
So there was this big story about who as a member of the wolf pack is on the front. And everyone was saying that the last one, it's the leader who's protecting all the members from behind. So it's like,
yeah, that was the story, that nobody is left behind and the real leaders are at the back and all those things. And then you have these old guys in the front. But it got so popular, and then so many people had so inspiring leadership messages, and we can learn so much from animals and blah blah blah, that the International Wolf Center had to publish an announcement, and they said, "This is bullshit. This is not true. It sounds great, but it's not true, because technically the most difficult part of the journey is the beginning. That's the most energy consuming. So they cannot be the old guys, not at all. It's nothing to do with that. So probably these are the young ones." And this guy at the end is not the leader. Probably this is the guy who got lost and went for a tinker or something. It's nothing to do with leadership. So it's a great story. But like Yuval Noah Harari said, that the best stories need to be great. They don't have to be true. And he's right. And we can see that on social media as well. It's nothing to do with facts. Usually a story is good if I like it and if it fits my view. If it doesn't, it's fake news. That's how the human mind works. But then we also add some micro decisions. So even if we talk about coaches or leaders, are you guessing and hoping for the best? Or you want to make decisions based on up-to-date relevant data? So here we talk about the 4 levels of expertise, that you can be a fake expert, the virtual signaling one. You can be the expert who present, experts who research. So this is kind of difficult because these are really smart. They have some kind of solutions, but these are the ones who are not necessarily passionate about the topic, but they want to be the hero that slays the dragon. So it's my solution that has to work. Because level 4 experts, data-driven solutions, experts who make things better, that's the highest level. These are the ones who understand that when you create synergy, when you work with other people, then it's not that you get less spotlight, but you shine more light on the problem itself. So probably you're going to solve it. They're happy to share, they're happy to contribute, they're happy to collaborate. Level 3, no, it's me, only me. I want to be the hero. That's the main difference. But again, you offer a model, a framework, you offer a label, so people can make a more nuanced decision. So which one do you want to be? Which expert, which level? And Kasia asked me to share some examples that didn't work. Well, lots of people didn't like this. Lots of people, they didn't. Even though it's true, a lot of people didn't like it because it highlighted something that they wanted to hide. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because we are there to serve people, not to please them. And I find that really unethical when people use these important topics like DNI and psychological safety and all those things as a marketing tool.
Yeah,
They might be passionate about it, but without expertise, they can cause more harm than good.
Yeah, but we had people when Csaba was coming to this slide on a presentation, and then a couple of minutes later, they were leaving. So they found it quite offensive.
Well, we don't have to please everyone.
Interesting. It's very interesting. So sometimes, your audience can react in different ways on certain things.
Yeah. But that's why you have a niche. So now I think it's pretty clear what we are for and what we are against. And we're not a big fan of fake experts. So, just because somebody is passionate about something doesn't mean that they have an expertise. And the problem is that if somebody invests in those things and they are not getting the results, then they are risking the future of the company. And that's not fair. I find that really unethical. If somebody is not up to date and they don't provide real value. And if those people get offended, then they do. Doesn't matter. But my goal is for the leaders to know the difference. That matters the most. So we have to raise standards in our field, let's be honest, because coaching is diluted. It's full of cowboys who promise anything, but they cannot deliver. They come up with fancy titles, but maybe the clients don't know the difference. And if they have bad experience, then they think, coaching doesn't work. And from that perspective, they're right. So we have to raise the bar. And I do believe that there's a huge gap in the market, and that is data-driven leadership, team, and culture development. Data-driven, with up-to-date tools. And this is what we talk about. There's a 4-step process. You measure, you visualize, you optimize, and then you can grow. And let's be honest, most of the solutions are missing the first 2 steps. They offer the solution without diagnosis. And that is the exact opposite of expert advice. When we go to a company, I'm not arrogant enough to tell them that this is your problem. No, there's diagnosis, and then we figure it out. We can have the data, but the insights come from the people. And the closing, what do we do? So we need a quick summary. So in the beginning, I asked them about how would you ruin the company? ChatGPT came up with 6 steps. So I connected to the 9 biomarkers within the 3 invisible forces. These are the biomarkers that are directly linked to growth, profit, and engagement. The more you understand them, the more you can optimize them, the more money you make. It's that simple. And if you don't do these behaviors, then you measure them. And then we show them an example as well. This is one client going from here to here, improved psychological safety by 30%, motivation by 25%. Who can provide this level of transparency? There's not a lot of competition there, let's be honest. The higher up you go, the less competition you have. Who enjoy the workshops? Yeah, there are lots of people like that. But again, we are serving people. Call to action, there are 2 different ones. One is for the leaders. how we use the same methodology to work with individuals, leaders within the company, and with teams, including the leader. And also, if coaches or consultants want to be part of the solution, they want ICF accredited, multi-award winning solution, a scalable business model, and a meaningful legacy with an awesome community, here it is. There is the opportunity. So we have one certification in March, and maybe we have one in October. We do it twice a year. We don't do any annual fee or anything like that. Our goal is to help people as much as possible. It's that simple. And then still not everybody is ready for it. So we can add more value and more shiny stuff. And we can combine both. So if they want to read more articles in the Forbes, they can. So I always talk about the same topic, but from different angles, highlighting the USPs and the current issues. Then if it's award-winning and accredited and lots of testimonials, then it's fantastic. And then we also have the Q&A. And this is where you learn the most. How do they talk about the topic? What are the issues? What are the problems they are facing? Maybe they're facing within their own clientele, which is fantastic. We can learn from it. So this is where, for example, I show them these are the updates on LinkedIn. The two of them had more than 2 million views because they tapped into something really important. They hit a nerve that resonated with people. That data without stories are powerless, but stories without data are just noise. So we combine both. That's powerful. So this is almost like a summary of everything that we did and why we do that. Or that people are the greatest assets or liability. And most of the people look at it and, oh yeah, it's happening to us. Yeah, that's exactly. Even though we invest in AI and technology, in between you have people. So what's the motivation for them to implement it? So that is the logic behind the webinar. This is the idea, what worked and what didn't work. I'm curious about your insights, what you think, what you want to know more about.
Csaba, could I just ask you on the call to action, because I've never done a webinar before for corporate or organizations that would be a size that would go for this type of project. It's more business owners. So would a call to action be to do some sort of a discovery call with them on a one-to-one basis, or?
So I can tell you what I did and what didn't work. So in the beginning, I was gullible, poor little naive thing. So when I did the webinar, then automatically I sent everyone the summary and I invited everyone to take the assessment. Big mistake. People don't appreciate free stuff. That's just human nature, awful, but that's what it is. So now I do it differently. I ask people to, if they want the summary of the slides, drop me an email. I put my email address in the chat.
Okay.
And then the people who email me, they get the summary. So now we have leads.
Mm-hmm.
And then I send it to them. And usually I send the copy of the book as well, just in case. And then we can follow it up. We can have a meeting if they want to learn more about it. If the meeting goes well, then maybe we can invite them to take the assessment. So there is a kind of funnel. It's not automatic, it's very personal, but you know exactly that even the training is live and it's never recorded because it is a personal topic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my assumption that now when AI is taking over, and I think a lot of coaches are going to disappear or replaced, but there's going to be more demand on a premium level.
Mm-hmm.
More personal, more data-driven, more customized, as opposed to generic advice based on other people's problems.
Mm-hmm.
That's my theory. That's why I'm doing another degree in psychology. So I think that is still going to be in demand even more because the changes are just putting more pressure on individuals and teams, how they handle it. I think that is creating more problems.
Mm-hmm.
So they need more solutions, and robots are not going to fix that.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. It's brilliant.
If I'm right or wrong, we're going to find out soon.
Yeah.
Anyone else happy to share any insights? Was there anything confusing?
Tracking, pulling everyone. So one by one, what is your experience of today? What is the most valuable part? Anna?
Anna taking over the stage again.
The sacrificing myself.
Oh,
Fantastic.
thank you. Yeah, the hero, you see?
Now I was reviewing my notes, and I think for me definitely the diagram when you showed the pain and pleasure and this journey from failure, was it the first one, to what they want, was very helpful, especially for the presentation tomorrow. I have to say that I disconnected with the hero's journey because I have limited capacity of processing information. I I also know the hero's journey from another context of designing training, and I just couldn't focus so long, so I disconnected for a moment. But then I was back when you were saying also how make it easy, the importance of how make it easy to understand, and I was there and I can help you. So this idea of for presentation, and it was even before hero journey in fact. Yeah, so for me this will be the most important things, and I know many of the contents that you presented, I know it already from another webinar, so this is why it was not new. And in terms of feedback, so for example, I really have problems, like my attention span is super short, so
You don't say that.
for me, sorry?
You don't say that. Surprise me.
But I'm not the only one, so I'm not like super an exception. This is why for me, I would, in the webinars we try to have like more interactions, not interactions by asking people what do you think, but rather to make them do something, or going into breakout rooms for a moment, or activate a poll, or really make them do something. So this would be like for me, for how to make it more interactive, a kind of feedback.
I think it's a fair point. If I do a normal webinar, that would make sense, but this one is recorded, so breakout rooms wouldn't make sense. And I try to make it more interactive, but I think if that's why I asked people if they didn't do a webinar or a speech, then they had less insights. That makes it a bit more difficult. But otherwise, it would have been more interactive. But polls, yeah.
But personally, about the feedback about the breakout rooms, I understand the point of them, and you know that they can really bring up the engagement, and the people are not stuck in the information only. Personally, very often when I want to learn about the topic or I'm interested in something, and then people putting me from one to another breakout room, I'm leaving the webinar.
But you know, I'm a social butterfly, so
yeah, I know, and we also are observing that sometimes in our webinars that and sometimes there are maybe like too many. It depends. So because people have different preferences, definitely.
Yeah, but sometimes you come in as well for information about the specific topic. It's not about, you know, entertainment for me and being part. Like, I'm not ready to go, you know, have a conversation, or you're going in a room where there is two people that are nothing and you're just there by yourself, and you
yeah, but
my experience.
The breakout rooms are not for entertainment. They are more for assimilating a new idea, for example, or
I understand.
coming up and activating the knowledge you have, you know, to connect better with the content. Because how long can you listening to someone like talking at you? Because it's like talking head.
it depends on the topic of the webinar as well, because you do a lot of events, and that's very different. And of course, it has to be more engaging. To me, this is more about this.
But everyone is
informative.
different. I'm just saying, like, you know, like you have to
Yeah.
look from a very different perspective. So seriously,
Yeah, I believe it.
I get really annoyed and I'm leaving the webinar, even though that I'm interested in the topic. I don't know. This is, and you know, like if you're
So
looking at the
antisocial.
disc
Just
side, I'm an I person.
So maybe you had a bad experience in a breakout room, or
Maybe, oh, I just want to get into the
just
topic.
give me the meat.
Yeah, I think maybe that's what it is. Like I'm interested in this, not the chit chat.
But
If I
that's why
want
we
to
need
chit chat,
to.
I go to the bar.
That's why we need to understand what's the
yeah, but if it's
purpose of the
about the
event.
topic, you are not
Yeah.
speaking about, oh,
Yeah.
let's introduce to each other, but the breakout room should be intentional and
Yeah.
should have a topic related to the topic of the webinar.
But you see, it's interesting. You have very different experience. I have very different experience,
Yeah.
and it's something to just think about.
Yeah.
So if you're creating your own webinar or how you want to structure that, I think so. It's always about testing, see it what works, what doesn't. Monica, how is your experience with the webinars? Have you ever created or presentations like this?
No, I have not done any webinars just yet. But I know in participating with webinars, I'm on both ends. Like sometimes it's the content, and I guess it just depends on the webinar, because I can see Anna's point as well, because you want to transfer that knowledge and you almost need a thought partner, to kind of talk through whatever content or next steps that you're taking. So again, it just depends on the type of webinar. I think with intentionality, as we prepare, as facilitators and execute webinars, just to keep in mind of what is the outcomes, kind of going back to the questions in, the structure of having the big idea and then looking at the principle, digging why the concept's important, right? And building the webinar based on that thinking as you're deciding if you're going to do breakout rooms or polls, or what type of engagement are you having for all diverse type of participants in their learning experience.
Agreed. True.
I think it's a really interesting topic. Because that's, you can use it, it's not only for the webinars, okay, the breakout rooms and interaction, but the whole system and how it's structured, that can be anything. That can be from the small pitch going to a bigger presentation or workshops.
And I think something very important is that, and I know that I have to really think about it preparing for tomorrow, is that less is more. Often really less is more, or not often, always.
Absolutely.
In fact.
But how many times we said this? Because you remember when Csaba on the beginning was doing the webinars, it was so much content, so much information, because he has so much to share and he wanted to give to people. But then people were like, what's just happened?
Yeah, that was not good.
No. So it's true. How is for you, Anne-Marie?
I haven't done a webinar on the ICQ Global stuff.
But it's not only about the ICQ Global, but anything.
I've done a lot of webinars since COVID started, and exactly like you're saying about Csaba, in the beginning, I overthought and I overshared information, and it was coming from a place of I want these people to see what they can do with their business and turn it around. But it was actually a coach that I worked with, and she reviewed my webinar and she came back and she said, there's two things. First of all, you've overthought, so they think they have all the information and they're not going to buy. Or secondly, you've overloaded them so much that say, she is way too much. I couldn't handle working with her. She's fried my head in 45 minutes. So it was a learning curve. So I really like the structure of the one you've just gone through, Csaba. I'm definitely going to devise a webinar around that to run it for corporate.
Fantastic. Bye-bye, Anna. Good luck.
Bye, Anna. Yeah, but that was great. I'm really glad I got logged on. It's brilliant.
Fantastic.
Because I actually this year want to drive more training into the business. I've started working with some bigger healthcare groups on the executive coaching side, but out of that, then I want to try and pull the training.
Mm.
because it's more scalable, it's easier revenue. There's no VAT,
Yeah.
no messing. So hopefully, so I'm going to aim to have a webinar done in Q1. That's going to be my